The universe's cry for help. In a corner of the vast universe, a grand council of alien species gathered in a massive chamber. The walls shimmered with lights from distant stars, but the mood inside was dark and heavy. Representatives from dozens of advanced civilizations sat silently, their faces showing fear and hopelessness. The galaxy was in peril. A dark force, an enemy no one fully understood, was spreading like a plague. It had destroyed entire planets, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Armies had been sent to fight it. Fleets with the most advanced ships and weapons had tried to stop it. But one by one, they'd all vanished. The council leader, a tall alien with glowing blue eyes and silvery skin, stood up. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We are out of options. This enemy grows stronger with every victory. Our people are terrified. If we do nothing, the galaxy will fall." Murmurs filled the room. The representatives argued among themselves. Some wanted to keep fighting, even if it seemed hopeless. Others suggested fleeing to distant galaxies, though no one truly believed they could outrun the threat. Finally, a small, nervous alien with green skin and wide yellow eyes spoke up. "There is one option," he said hesitantly, "but it is dangerous." All eyes turned to him. "Speak," the leader commanded. The small alien took a deep breath. "We could ask them." A collective gasp spread across the chamber. Everyone knew who he meant. Humans. The Deathworlders. Humans lived on a planet they called Earth, a place no other species could survive. It was a death world, filled with violent storms, deadly animals, and harsh conditions. Yet, somehow, humans not only survived but thrived. They were unpredictable, emotional, and sometimes reckless. Most species avoided them, calling them dangerous. But their reputation for surviving the impossible was legendary. "They are our last hope," the green alien continued. "They have a history of fighting against impossible odds. They might succeed where we have failed." The council leader frowned. "Humans are unpredictable. They do not follow rules or logic as we do. They might cause more harm than good. Do we have a choice?" The green alien asked quietly. The room fell silent. He was right. The council had no other options. After a long pause, the leader nodded. "Send a team to Earth. Ask the humans for help." The journey to Earth was tense. A small group of aliens boarded a sleek, silver ship and set off toward the Death World. The crew was a mix of species, each chosen for their bravery, or perhaps their expendability. None of them wanted to go. The stories about Earth and its people were terrifying. As the ship approached the blue-green planet, their sensors went wild. The planet was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was chaotic, unpredictable, and full of life. Gigantic storms raged across its oceans. Volcanoes erupted in fiery displays. Strange creatures roamed the land, some of them larger and more dangerous than any life form the aliens had ever encountered. "This is madness," one of the aliens whispered, his tentacles trembling. "How do they survive here?" No one had an answer. The humans were a mystery. When the ship finally landed, the crew braced themselves. They expected hostility, perhaps even violence. But what greeted them was entirely unexpected. Humans, curious and energetic, gathered around the ship. They didn't seem afraid. In fact, they seemed amused. A tall human with a wide grin approached the aliens. He wore simple clothing and had a relaxed, confident air about him. "Welcome to Earth," he said cheerfully. "You don't look like tourists, so I'm guessing you're here for something important." The aliens exchanged nervous glances. The human's casual attitude was confusing. Did he not realize the galaxy was in danger? The green alien, who had suggested contacting the humans, stepped forward. His voice shook as he explained the situation. He told the humans about the dark force, the destruction it had caused, and the Council's desperate decision to seek help from Earth. The human leader listened carefully, his expression growing serious. When the alien finished, the human nodded. "Sounds like a big problem," he said, "but we're pretty good at solving big problems." The alien stared at him, stunned. His confidence seemed almost foolish. Didn't he understand the scale of the threat? Didn't he feel fear? "How can you be so calm?" One of the aliens blurted out. "This enemy has destroyed entire civilizations." The human shrugged. "We've faced tough situations before. We'll figure it out." The aliens were speechless. Humans were truly unlike any species they had ever encountered. They seemed to thrive on challenges, even ones that should have terrified them. As the humans began preparing for the mission, the aliens couldn't shake their unease. They had come to Earth out of desperation, but now they weren't sure if they had made the right choice. The humans were confident, yes, but were they truly capable of saving the galaxy? Or were they simply too reckless to understand the danger? The answer would come soon enough. First contact with Deathworlders. The alien ship hovered nervously in Earth's atmosphere, its sleek silver hull reflecting the bright blue sky. From the viewports, the alien crew watched the planet below with a mix of awe and dread. Mountains stretched toward the heavens, oceans roared with storms, and vast green forests spread endlessly, hiding creatures unknown to any other species in the galaxy. Earth was beautiful, but terrifying. For centuries, rumors about Earth and its inhabitants had spread across the stars. Earth was labeled a Category 12 death world, the highest classification for a planet hostile to life. Most species couldn't even set foot on it without risking injury or death, and yet humans flourished here. It was said they thrived in conditions that would annihilate any other race. The ship's captain, a nervous insectoid named Valtrex, wiped the condensation forming on his large, multifaceted eyes. His mandibles clicked nervously. "I cannot believe we are actually doing this," he muttered. Next to him, Silak, the green-skinned alien who had proposed contacting the humans, leaned closer to the viewport. His yellow eyes scanned the cities below. "Look at them. They seem peaceful." Valtrex's eyes narrowed. "Peaceful? That's a death world down there. If it looks peaceful, it's probably a trap." Silak said nothing. He didn't blame Valtrex for his hesitation. Earth's reputation as a dangerous, chaotic world was well earned. But now, as they descended toward a sprawling city near the coastline, Selleck felt more curiosity than fear. The ship landed in an open field just outside the human city, its landing gear pressing into soft grass. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of nearby trees. The sensors immediately picked up countless life forms in the area: birds, small mammals, and even large predators. To the aliens, this was a battlefield. To the humans, it was just Tuesday. The ship's ramp hissed as it lowered to the ground. A small group of aliens, including Valtrex and Silak, stepped out hesitantly. They expected armed soldiers, heavy fortifications, perhaps even weapons trained on them. Instead, a group of humans stood casually nearby, holding devices that glowed faintly. They seemed more interested in recording the ship on their strange handheld screens than showing any form of hostility. One human, a tall man with short hair and dark sunglasses, approached with a grin. "Welcome to Earth," the human said, his voice deep but friendly. "You guys lost." The aliens exchanged bewildered glances. Silak stepped forward cautiously. "We are not lost," he said carefully. "We have come seeking help." The human's eyebrows rose. "Help? From us?" He chuckled lightly. "Well, that's new." Valtrex's mandibles twitched in irritation. "You find this amusing?" he asked. "We are here on behalf of the Galactic Council. Our galaxy faces annihilation, and humanity is our last hope. This is no laughing matter." The human's smile faded slightly, but there was still a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Oh, I'm not laughing at your situation," he said. "I just didn't expect the council to knock on our door. We don't get many visitors, you know." Silak watched him carefully. There was something strange about this human. He wasn't fearful or nervous, not like the aliens were. If anything, he seemed excited. Why are you not afraid? Silak asked, unable to hold back the question. We are facing an enemy capable of destroying entire star systems. Your planet is classified as a death world, yet you act as if this is a casual meeting. The human chuckled again. Because it is. Look around, friend. Earth isn't exactly easy to live on. We've faced extinction events, plagues, wars, and natural disasters since the beginning of time. If we panicked every time something dangerous showed up, we wouldn't have made it this far. Valtrex tilted his head. You speak as if your world is constantly trying to destroy you. It is, the human replied, a grin spreading across his face. And that's why we're so good at surviving. Silak was beginning to understand. Earth's harsh environment hadn't weakened humans. It had forged them into something stronger. They weren't like other species. They didn't hide from danger. They embraced it. The human extended his hand toward Silak. Name's Captain Daniel Hayes, by the way. I lead the local defense fleet. If you need help saving the galaxy, you've come to the right place. Silak hesitated for a moment, unsure what to do with the human's outstretched hand. After a brief pause, he extended his own and shook it, following the strange human custom he had read about. Thank you, Captain Hayes, Silak said. We will need all the help we can get. As the alien crew followed Hayes toward the human city, Valtrex leaned toward Silak. I still don't trust them, he whispered. Silak glanced at Hayes, who was already explaining Earth's defense capabilities with an unsettling amount of confidence. Neither do I, Silak admitted softly. But I think that's what makes them perfect for this mission. Preparing for the impossible battle. The alien delegation followed Captain Daniel Hayes through the bustling streets of the human city. Towering skyscrapers stretched toward the sky, and sleek vehicles zipped overhead. Despite the advanced technology, Earth's surface was chaotic, noisy, crowded, and unpredictable. Yet, the humans moved through it all with ease, as if the chaos was just part of daily life. Valtrex's antennae twitched nervously as he scanned the surroundings. This planet feels unstable, he muttered, his voice barely audible over the distant honking of traffic. Silak glanced at him. Perhaps instability is their strength. Ahead of them, Hayes continued walking, occasionally stopping to chat with humans they passed on the street. He seemed unfazed by the presence of the alien delegation, as if interstellar visitors were nothing out of the ordinary. After several minutes, the group arrived at a massive building made of reinforced steel and dark glass. The words Earth Defense Command were etched into the side in large, bold letters. The entrance was guarded by soldiers in sleek armor, but instead of heavy, intimidating weapons, they carried compact, efficient rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Welcome to our little HQ, Hayes said, leading the group inside. This is where the magic happens. The interior was a mix of organized military efficiency and the clutter of human creativity. Holographic displays floated above desks, showing maps of distant star systems, while humans in uniform moved briskly between workstations. On one side of the room, a group of engineers argued over schematics, gesturing wildly. On the other, soldiers loaded strange, custom-built weapons into crates. Silak's eyes widened as he took it all in. This is your defense center. Hayes smirked. Not what you expected. No, Silak admitted. I expected something more orderly. Hayes laughed. We're not the most organized bunch, but we get the job done. That's the human way. Valtrex stepped forward, his mandibles clicking in agitation. Forgive me, Captain Hayes, but I fail to see how this chaos will stop a galactic threat. The enemy we face has destroyed entire fleets. You speak of surviving, but survival alone will not win this war. Hayes leaned against a nearby console, folding his arms. Let me tell you something, Valtrex. Survival is only step one. After that, we start fighting back. Hard. He gestured toward the soldiers across the room. You see those people? Every one of them grew up on a planet that tried to kill them at least once. Earth isn't kind. Between natural disasters, wars, and diseases, we've been fighting for survival since the day we learned to walk upright. That's why we don't scare easily. And that's why we're your best shot at winning this war." Valtrex opened his mandibles to respond, but Silak raised a hand to stop him. "Let them show us, Valtrex. Actions speak louder than words." Hayes grinned. "I like you, Silak. Come on, let me show you something special." The armory. Hayes led the delegation down a long corridor to a heavily secured door. After scanning his ID, the door hissed open, revealing a massive underground hangar. Rows of heavily modified starships filled the space, each one bristling with weapons that seemed far too large for their size. Engineers scrambled around the ships, welding, calibrating, and testing. Silek's eyes narrowed. "These ships, they aren't standard designs." Hayes nodded proudly. "Nope. Custom built. Humans don't like using the same tools as everyone else. We tweak, modify, and sometimes outright rebuild our ships from scratch." Valtrix's eyes narrowed at a vessel with jagged, uneven plating. "That ship looks like it was stitched together from scrap." Hayes smirked. "It was, but it's fast, stealthy, and carries enough firepower to punch through a capital ship. Looks aren't everything, my friend." Silak stepped closer to one of the ships, running his hand along the metal hull. There were scorch marks and dents, signs of past battles. "Your ships look like they've seen many battles." "They have," Hayes replied. "But we patch them up and send them right back out. Humans don't waste resources. If it flies and shoots, it's good enough." Valtrix's antennae twitched in disbelief. "You fight with damaged ships. Better than not fighting at all," Hayes said with a shrug. "Sometimes you don't get the luxury of perfect conditions. That's something a death world teaches you." Training grounds. Hayes guided the group toward another section of the hangar, a training area where soldiers sparred and practiced with strange weapons. Explosions echoed from a distant range as teams tested heavy artillery. One soldier, a tall woman with a scar running down her cheek, approached Hayes and saluted. "Captain, the new recruits are ready for live drills." Hayes nodded. "Good. Let's give our guests a demonstration." The woman gestured to a team of soldiers lining up with odd handheld devices. At her signal, the soldiers activated the devices, which projected hard light shields around their bodies. Moments later, small drones descended, firing lasers at the team. The soldiers moved fluidly, using the shields to block and counterattack with precision. Silek's eyes widened in surprise. "Impressive. Your soldiers adapt quickly." Hayes grinned. "Adapt or die. That's the rule here." As the demonstration ended, Silek turned to Valtrex. "I believe we found the allies we need." Valtrex remained silent for a long moment before finally nodding. "Perhaps, but I still think they're insane." Hayes laughed. "We'll take that as a compliment." Entering the war zone. The human fleet emerged from the wormhole like a pack of wolves, sleek and aggressive against the endless backdrop of space. Their ships, though smaller than the massive dreadnoughts of other species, radiated a dangerous energy, scared, modified, and built for speed and destruction. Silak watched from the observation deck of the lead ship, feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread. This was no ordinary fleet. It wasn't polished, organized, or standardized like the armadas of the Galactic Council. These ships were battered, welded together with scraps and parts from countless battles, and bristling with weapons that seemed excessive. Valtrex, standing beside him, clicked his mandibles nervously. "I cannot believe we are placing the fate of the galaxy in the hands of these humans." Silak glanced at him. "You saw them train, Valtrex. They thrive in chaos. Maybe that's exactly what we need." The door behind them slid open, and Captain Hayes strode in, casually adjusting his worn leather jacket. He flashed a grin, but there was a sharpness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Out here, away from Earth, Hayes seemed different, more focused, more dangerous. "We're almost at the front lines," Hayes said, nodding toward the viewport. "You might want to strap in. Things are about to get rough." Selak frowned. "We haven't even arrived at the battlefield." Hayes chuckled darkly. "With this enemy, the battlefield usually finds you first." Moments later, the edge of the war zone. The human fleet approached the shattered remains of an alien outpost. The space around it was littered with debris, twisted metal, broken ships, and lifeless stations drifting aimlessly. Sparks flickered from ruined ships, the remnants of what was once a proud defense line. Selak felt his throat tighten. This was the Altheron defense grid. There were over 50 warships stationed here. Hayes frowned as he scanned the wreckage. Well, whatever hit them didn't leave much behind. Suddenly, the sensors flared to life. Red lights flashed across the control panels, and alarms echoed through the ship. "Contact! Multiple bogies approaching fast," a human officer shouted from the tactical station. Hayes straightened. "Bring up the visual." The screen shifted to display a swarm of enemy ships appearing from the shadows of the wreckage. They were sleek and black, moving unnaturally, like serpents slithering through space. The alien ships had no visible engines, just smooth, shifting shapes that almost seemed alive. Valtrex stiffened. The Wraith Armada. Selak's heart sank. The enemy had found them. Hayes, however, grinned. "Well, isn't this a nice welcome party?" Valtrex snapped toward him. "Captain, this is no time for jokes. Their fleet outnumbers us 5-1. Hayes leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "Yeah, but we got one thing they don't." Selak's voice was tense. "What's that?" Hayes smirked. "Human stubbornness." The battle begins. The human fleet surged forward, engines roaring as they accelerated toward the enemy. Unlike the rigid formations used by other species, the human ships weaved unpredictably, each vessel darting and shifting with erratic patterns. Selak gripped the edge of the console as the ship rocked violently. The human gunners opened fire, unleashing a barrage of plasma, missiles, and kinetic rounds. The weapons didn't just target the enemy, they anticipated them, striking weak points and cutting off escape routes with terrifying accuracy. The Wraith ships retaliated, swarming the human fleet like locusts. Bright beams of dark energy lanced through space, slicing into human ships. One of the smaller cruisers exploded, but instead of retreating, the remaining ships pressed forward, fighting even harder. Selak's eyes darted across the battlefield. "Your ships, they're not retreating despite the losses." Hayes didn't look away from the viewport. "Retreat isn't really in our vocabulary." Valtrex hissed. "You cannot win by throwing yourselves at the enemy." Hayes finally turned toward him, his expression suddenly cold. "We're not throwing ourselves at them. We're testing them, seeing how they move, how they fight. Every battle teaches us something." As if on cue, the lead human ship suddenly banked hard, swinging around to face the densest part of the enemy formation. Hayes activated the comms. "Fire the ghost wave," he ordered. A moment later, the ship's hull shimmered, and a wave of electromagnetic energy rippled outward. The Wraith ships flickered as the pulse disrupted their cloaking fields, exposing their vulnerable underbellies. "Now light 'em up," Hayes growled. The human fleet unleashed another volley, targeting the exposed weak points. One by one, the Wraith ships began to explode, their sleek forms breaking apart in fiery bursts. Selak's mouth opened slightly in astonishment. You used the battle to flush them out." Hayes grinned. "Told you. Adapt or die." The aftermath. As the last of the enemy ships retreated into the void, the human fleet regrouped. The battle had cost them several ships, but the majority of the fleet remained intact. Selak turned to Hayes, his respect growing. "You fought them off with fewer ships and less firepower. I underestimated you." Hayes shrugged. "Most people do." Valtrex, though still uneasy, gave a reluctant nod. "Perhaps humans truly are suited for this war." Hayes smiled faintly, but there was no triumph in his eyes, only determination. This was just a warm-up. The real fight's still ahead. Selek exhaled slowly as the human fleet pushed deeper into enemy territory. For the first time since the war began, he felt something unfamiliar. Hope. Humanity's hidden weapon. The war zone had quieted, but the scars of battle lingered in the blackness of space. Fires burned in the wreckage of enemy ships, their broken hulls drifting aimlessly. The human fleet, though battered, pressed forward through the debris field. On the bridge of the lead ship, Captain Hayes leaned over the control panel, scanning for signs of the next threat. His expression was unreadable, calm, but sharp like a blade held at the ready. Selek stepped forward, staring at the tactical display. We pushed them back, but they'll return in greater numbers. Hayes nodded without looking up. They always do. Valtrex's antennae twitched nervously, and when they return, we may not survive the next engagement. We cannot keep relying on surprise tactics. Eventually, they will adapt. Hayes finally turned to face them, his gaze steady. They can adapt. So can we. That's the game, Valtrex. The side that adapts faster wins. Selek crossed his arms. Captain, I have to ask, what makes humanity so different? We've fought alongside dozens of species, but none of them have survived engagements like this for long. What's your secret? Hayes was silent for a long moment, his eyes drifting to the viewport. The distant stars reflected in the glass, but his focus seemed far away, as if remembering something deep within him. Finally, he exhaled and spoke, his voice quieter but heavier than before. You want to know why humans survive? Hayes said, his gaze fixed on the stars. It's because we've been fighting wars since before we even understood what stars were. Selek and Valtrex exchanged a glance but said nothing, waiting for Hayes to continue. The history of survival. Hayes leaned against the console, his posture relaxed, but his words carrying weight. Earth has been trying to kill us for millions of years. Everything on our planet is dangerous. Storms that can tear apart entire cities, diseases that wiped out civilizations, predators that hunted us at night. And when nature wasn't trying to kill us, we were busy fighting each other. He smirked slightly, though there was no humor in his eyes. Human history isn't clean. It's filled with wars, betrayals, disasters. But every time we got knocked down, we stood back up. We learned. We got smarter, faster, stronger. Survival isn't just part of our culture. It's in our blood. Selek frowned, struggling to grasp what Hayes was saying. But other species have survived harsh environments. None of them evolved the way humans did. Hayes chuckled softly. That's because most species evolved to avoid danger. We evolved to confront it. You know what the first human weapons were. Valtrex tilted his head. Primitive firearms. Hayes shook his head. Rocks. Sticks. Our ancestors didn't run from predators. They picked up the closest thing they could find and fought back. He tapped the console, pulling up an image of Earth's prehistory. A group of early humans surrounding a massive predator with nothing but spears. The scene depicted courage, desperation, and defiance. We learned that if you fight long enough, even the strongest predator can bleed. Hayes continued. And if it bleeds, it can die. The psychological edge. Selek stepped closer to the screen, staring at the ancient image. Your people's willingness to fight. Is that your greatest weapon? Hayes shook his head. That's just part of it. The real weapon is up here. He tapped his temple. It's how we think. We're unpredictable. When the odds are against us, we don't follow logic. We improvise, break the rules, and sometimes we get reckless. That's why we win. Our enemies can't predict chaos. Valtrex's mandibles twitched. That doesn't sound like a strategy. That sounds like gambling. Hayes grinned. It's both. The human captain leaned forward, eyes locked with Valtrex. We're the only species that will fight a battle we know we can't win, just to make sure the enemy loses more than we do. Because in the long run, That's how you win wars. Attrition, sacrifice, stubbornness. We fight dirty, Valtrex. That's why we're still here. The turning point. Suddenly, alarms blared across the bridge. Red warning lights flashed as the tactical display lit up with enemy signals. "They're back," the sensor officer reported. 30 ships on approach. Closing fast. Hayes straightened, his smirk returning. Right on schedule. Selleck's heart pounded as the enemy fleet materialized on the screen, larger than before and moving with precise, synchronized formation. Valtrex's voice wavered. "Captain, we cannot fight this many." "Who said anything about fighting them head-on?" Hayes said, activating the comms. "All ships, initiate Phase 2. Selleck's eyes narrowed. Phase 2. The human captain grinned. "You're about to see what human stubbornness really looks like." The trap. As the enemy ships advanced, the human fleet began to scatter, splitting into small groups and darting in different directions. "What are they doing?" Valtrex hissed. "They're abandoning formation." Selak watched closely. "No, they're leading the enemy." The alien fleet pursued the scattered human ships, not realizing they were being drawn toward a field of asteroids. Hidden within the floating debris were explosives, detonators disguised as wreckage. "Now," Hayes said calmly. The explosives ignited, sending a chain reaction through the asteroid field. The enemy ships, caught in the blast radius, were torn apart by shrapnel and debris. The survivors scrambled to retreat, leaving the battlefield in chaos. Selak stared at the screen, speechless. Valtrex slumped against the console. "You lured them into a minefield." Hayes shrugged. "Sometimes the best way to win a fight is to let the enemy think they've already won." Selak finally smiled. "I think I understand now. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't technology or firepower." Hayes nodded. "It's our refusal to quit." The final stand. The enemy's retreat was brief. As the wreckage of the ambush cooled in the asteroid field, new signals flared on the long-range sensors, hundreds of them. The main Wraith Armada was approaching, larger and more relentless than before. The ambush had worked, but it only delayed the inevitable. On the bridge of the human flagship Ironclad, Captain Hayes stood silently, watching the sensor display as wave after wave of enemy ships emerged from the void. Selak and Valtrex stood behind him, their faces tense. "There's too many," Valtrex said, his voice a low hiss. "We cannot survive this." Hayes didn't turn around. His hands gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white. "Survival's never guaranteed, Valtrex. But if we go down, we make sure they remember us." Selak stepped forward. "Captain, the Council's reinforcements are still light years away. We could retreat, regroup somewhere deeper in Allied space." Hayes finally glanced at him, his eyes sharp. "And let them chase us across the galaxy, burning every system in their path." He shook his head. "No, we stop them here." Selak opened his mouth to argue, but something in Hayes's expression stopped him. The human's calm wasn't born from arrogance or recklessness. It was the look of someone who had accepted the odds and planned to defy them anyway. The calm before the storm. The human fleet reorganized, battered ships falling into formation around Ironclad. Engineers scrambled across the decks, patching hulls with whatever materials they could find. Medics worked tirelessly, treating injured crew members while the remaining soldiers prepared for boarding actions. Selak watched in quiet disbelief. Despite the overwhelming threat, there was no panic among the humans, only determination. "Your people," he began, struggling to find the right words. "They prepare as if they still believe victory is possible." Hayes smirked. "That's because it is." Valtrex made a chittering noise of frustration. "How can you believe that? They outnumber us 50-1. Hayes shrugged. 50-1's not bad. I've seen worse." Selak raised an eyebrow. "You enjoy impossible odds." Hayes chuckled. "Nah. But I've learned something over the years. When the odds are against you, the enemy gets cocky. They make mistakes, And humans, we're really good at exploiting mistakes. The battle begins. The enemy fleet surged forward, dark shadows against the stars. The Wraith ships moved in eerie unison, their hulls rippling like liquid metal. All ships, Hayes said over the comms, his voice calm but firm, hold your positions. Let them come to us. Selleck's eyes widened. We're not advancing. Why would we? Hayes replied. They think they've got us cornered. Let's not ruin the surprise. The enemy closed the distance, weapons charging. Plasma lances flared to life, arcing through the void like serpents. The human fleet held its ground. Valtrex's mandibles clicked nervously. They're within firing range. Not yet, Hayes said quietly. Selleck clenched his fists as the enemy ships loomed closer, nearly point blank. Captain, if we wait any longer. Now, Hayes said. In an instant, the entire human fleet exploded into motion. Ships veered in different directions, engines flaring as they darted between enemy lines. The Wraith Armada faltered, thrown off by the sudden, chaotic maneuvering. The human ships weaved through the enemy formation, targeting weak points and unleashing devastating fire at close range. The ironclad led the charge, carving a path directly through the enemy's heart. Selleck gripped the console tightly. You baited them into overextending. Hayes grinned. Of course, when the enemy thinks they're winning, that's when you hit 'em hardest. The last line of defense. Despite the initial success, the enemy fleet was vast and relentless. One by one, human ships fell, overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Valtrex's voice wavered. Captain, we can't hold this line forever. Hayes didn't respond immediately. His eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. We're not holding it forever, just long enough. Selleck glanced at the screen. The enemy flagship was now within striking distance. Hayes activated the comms. Ironclad to all ships. Focus fire on the flagship. We take it down. The rest will scatter. The bridge fell silent as the order sank in. Valtrex's antennae twitched. You're suggesting we charge directly at the largest ship in their fleet. Exactly. Valtrex hesitated. I cannot believe I'm agreeing to this. The charge. The ironclad surged forward, engines burning at maximum thrust. The remaining human ships followed in tight formation. Enemy fire rained down on them, tearing into their hulls, but they pressed on, undeterred. Selleck's heart pounded. The flagship loomed ahead like a fortress in the void. We won't break through in time, Valtrex shouted. Hayes's eyes darkened. Yes, we will. He activated the ship's intercom. All hands, brace for impact. Selleck's eyes widened. Captain. Hayes grinned. We're not going around it. We're going through it. The ironclad's engines roared as the ship accelerated, crashing directly into the flagship's shields. The force of the collision sent shockwaves rippling through space. For a brief, terrifying moment, everything seemed to stop. Then, the flagship's shields shattered. Explosions rippled along its surface as the human fleet poured fire into the breach. The massive vessel began to break apart, its pieces drifting lifelessly into the void. Victory, at a cost. As the flagship disintegrated, the remaining Wraith ships hesitated, then scattered, retreating into the darkness. A ragged cheer erupted across the human fleet, though the price of victory was clear. More than half the ships had been lost. Selleck turned to Hayes, who stood calmly at the center of the bridge. His expression didn't show relief, only quiet satisfaction. Valtrex exhaled sharply. I cannot believe that worked. Hayes smiled faintly. I told you, we don't quit. Selleck nodded slowly. No, you don't. And that may be humanity's greatest strength. Aftermath and legacy. The battlefield was eerily quiet. The shattered remains of the Wraith flagship drifted among the stars, its once imposing form reduced to a graveyard of twisted metal and flickering embers. The human fleet, battered and scared, slowly regrouped in the silence that followed the storm. Silak stood at the observation deck, gazing at the wreckage. The glow of distant fires reflected in his yellow eyes, and for the first time in weeks, his shoulders felt lighter. The war was not over, but this victory had shifted the tide. Valtrex joined him, his antennae drooping from exhaustion. They're retreating. The impossible has happened. Silak nodded slowly. Because of them. His gaze drifted to the far side of the bridge, where Captain Hayes stood overseeing repairs. Despite the victory, Hayes showed no signs of celebration. His focus remained sharp, issuing quiet orders to his crew. Silak approached, his steps echoing in the dim corridor. Captain Hayes. Hayes glanced up. Silak, you're still in one piece. Thanks to you, Silak replied. He hesitated for a moment, then added, the Council will want to commend you. Perhaps even offer resources for your fleet. Hayes's lips curved into a faint smirk. Appreciate the offer, but we're not in this for medals. Silak tilted his head. Why then? You've already proven yourselves. Why continue risking so much? Hayes's eyes flickered toward the viewport, where the stars stretched endlessly beyond the broken remains of the battlefield. Because they'll be back. And next time, they'll bring something worse. Valtrex, who had quietly joined the conversation, shifted nervously. You're saying this wasn't their full strength? Hayes's expression hardened. The Wraiths. No, this was just a scouting fleet. A test. Silak's heart sank. And the real Armada. They're still out there, Hayes said simply. But when they come, we'll be ready. A different breed. Silak studied Hayes carefully. The human's calm, even in the face of such dire predictions, was unsettling, but also reassuring. You seem certain, Silak said. Hayes leaned against the console, folding his arms. You know what Earth's biggest secret is, Silak. Silak frowned. No. Hayes smiled faintly. We never stop preparing for the next fight. Even in peacetime, we know something worse is coming. It's in our nature. Valtrex crossed his arms, clearly unconvinced. That is an exhausting way to live. Hayes chuckled. Maybe. But it's kept us alive this long. He pushed off the console, walking toward the viewport. Outside, salvage teams were already recovering damaged human ships, welding and repairing them in orbit. We don't see war as something to win or lose, Hayes continued. It's just part of the cycle. There's always another battle ahead. Silak's gaze followed his, watching the resilience of the human crews as they worked tirelessly, laughing and joking despite the carnage surrounding them. You fight, Silak said quietly, because you know no other way. Hayes turned to face him. No, we fight because someone has to. The Council's response. 2 days later, the Galactic Council convened in an emergency session, broadcasting across every star system under their jurisdiction. The victory against the Wraith fleet had rippled across the galaxy, spreading hope among countless worlds that had once believed the war unwinnable. Silak and Valtrex stood in the center of the Grand Hall, their presence requested by the highest-ranking counselors. The room buzzed with anticipation as holographic displays of the battle flickered above the chamber. Silak stepped forward, his voice steady. They fought without fear. They adapted when others hesitated. And when the enemy overwhelmed them, they stood their ground. Counselor Vrex frowned. Recklessness. Silak shook his head. Persistence. The humans do not fight like we do. They do not follow conventional tactics. They bend the rules, exploit weakness, and sacrifice without hesitation. And because of that, they survived. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Some counselors nodded in approval. Others whispered nervously. Valtrex stepped forward, his mandibles clicking softly. I misjudged them. I believed their methods were chaotic. But I now understand. Their chaos is their greatest weapon. Counselor Vrex's eyes narrowed. And you believe they can turn the tide of this war? Silak met his gaze. They already have. Returning to Earth. After the council session concluded, Selek and Valtrex returned to Earth aboard one of the human cruisers. As their ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, Selek gazed down at the sprawling cities and vibrant landscapes below. The world was alive, thriving despite its reputation as a death world. Valtrex watched from beside him. It still amazes me that they live here willingly. Selek smiled faintly. It's not just survival for them. It's home. As they landed, Captain Hayes stood waiting on the tarmac, hands in his jacket pockets. Selek stepped forward and extended his hand in the human gesture he had grown accustomed to. Captain Hayes, the Council will support your efforts. Earth's fleets will lead the next offensive. Hayes took his hand firmly. Good. We'll need every ship you can spare. Selek paused, his expression thoughtful. I've learned much from you, Captain. Humanity, you are not the strongest or the fastest species in the galaxy, but you are the most relentless. Hayes' eyes twinkled with amusement. We take pride in that. As the two walked toward the base, the setting sun cast long shadows over the field, but the light lingered on the horizon. In that moment, Selek realized something. The galaxy hadn't just gained new allies. It had gained hope.